Hey everyone, welcome to Required Readings Top 100. This is where we talk about our favorite books, our top picks, and books that we think you should read. Now, we're doing something a little bit different this week. In the previous weeks, we've discussed two books in these videos, but this time we're going to talk about one book instead. And so what is your choice for this week?
My choice is The Art of Gathering, How We Meet and Why It Matters by Priya Parker. I read this book in 2017, some warm months. So it could have been late spring, early summer. And I picked it up, obviously, because the cover is absolutely beautiful. And I do judge a book by its cover. We should definitely have an episode about that. But I picked this up because even in 2017, I felt as though the world or society was sort of moving away from connection, away from getting together with meaning, with purpose, or even just without meaning, without purpose, just getting together. We were a little bit more we were isolating ourselves a little bit more and more and more. And I say were, but really we're continuing to isolate ourselves more and more and more. And there are less gatherings, less opportunities to get together. But this book was a really interesting read too, because she really talks about having purpose behind a gathering. And as an intense control freak and an intense planner, I really resonated with this because there is nothing that gives me anxiety more than going over to somebody's house for a dinner party or for a book club or just going over and having that host or having my friend or whomever say to me, oh, just make yourself at home. There's a chapter in here where she talks about being a chill host as very selfish. And I completely and utterly agree with this in that you think that as the host, you think that you're being kind, you think you're being nice, you're like, oh, welcome, just do whatever you would do at home. But you're not at home, you're not going to do what you would normally do at home. And if it is for like a larger gathering where there might be multi-generations coming over, maybe it's a Thanksgiving dinner, maybe it is a book club, you might be one of the first 5 to show up. You don't want to sit in and you don't even know who else is going to be coming. You don't want to sit in a chair that actually would be better suited for somebody with lesser mobility or somebody who needs to get up and down more often because they're going to be going back and forth to the kitchen, or you don't want to sit in the host's seat kind of thing. So you really you're like, oh, where am I going to sit? Okay. And it puts a lot of stress on your guest. So instead of being a chill host, you say, welcome. Sit down right there. Would you like a glass of Coke or water or, give them choices too. Just don't say would you like anything to drink? Well, that person doesn't know what you have in your fridge. And maybe you're a household that doesn't drink alcohol. And the person's like, oh, I'd love a glass of wine. And then you have an awkward conversation about, well, we don't actually have alcohol in the house. And there's just all of these weird things that you have to then, or almost like landmines of conversation, where if you are a directive host, where you tell your guest what they should be doing, what their options are, it's actually a lot more kind. So I really liked the idea of setting these boundaries, setting these constrictions, because humans work very well with the known. They do not work well with the unknown at all. So these constrictions, they help. They're not a hindrance, saying no, you can't go in that room, or, no, we're you don't even have to say it. You just say what we are doing so that way they know what they're not really doing sort of implicitly. With the arrival of guests, Priya Parker, she talks about the beginnings of a gathering. And it might not be a gathering at your home. It could be an event. It could be like a conference or anything. But like creating this transition from the external world, from the world that you were in before, into this event. So creating that liminal space almost, that transition, that gate from one world into another can really set the purpose, can really set expectations. And again, humans do very, very well with expectations. And another expectation, it makes me so nervous as to like how long I'm going to be at a certain place or gathering or event or anything. It's like, if you don't have that end time, it's like, okay, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to be like, okay, now I want to leave. But then, like as a host, you're like, okay, I really wish these people would leave now. And not having that end time is stressful for everyone, for not only the guests, but also the host themselves. So creating that beginning time, that ending time, setting those expectations, setting those boundaries is just the polite thing to do. And with that, with those boundaries, it almost creates this atmosphere to have meaning in the event. And she definitely talks about things that you can do within the event and everything. And, we were talking about a book club earlier and just how most of the time they just devolve into a rant or a venting session with a bunch of people that you may know well, you may know casually, you may not know at all. And it kind of leaves you feeling like, well, what was the purpose of that? So giving all of these boundaries, all these constrictions really creates the meaning in and of itself.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. Priya Parker, I know a lot of this book seems to be focused on like gatherings, like not parties exactly, but something like parties. Something that she talks about, it's actually a chapter in this book, and I was wondering what you thought about it, is the idea of, it's actually one of the most controversial aspects, which I find interesting as to why this would be controversial, is the idea of closed doors. So I think it's actually a chapter in there, called Closed Doors, in which it is as important who you don't invite to a gathering as whom you do invite. And I was wondering what you thought about that, in terms of what Priya has to say about it versus maybe real world examples, and also sort of the controversy surrounding that.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Definitely of two minds on that one. We are all adults, and I think that we all should be getting along with each other, or at least have enough civility to be civil to one another. But that can be, and like maybe it's, two family members that don't talk anymore or are having a fight, and we'll just use that as an example, where, okay, well, people are often like, well, blood is thicker than water, their family, get over it, kind of thing. And yeah, again, we're adults, we can be civil, but having some agency over who we choose to spend our time with, and our time and our energy with, not only affects the two people involved, but if the family also knows about the tension between the two people, it creates a tension in the family as well. So that is a really, really difficult one, because it does set the tone, it does set the vibe, but
well, yeah. Think about maybe, I mean, I wonder if, family is one thing, and that's really tough. But even just like, not all the gatherings are necessarily family gatherings. Yeah. You mentioned the book club.
Yeah.
So something that comes to mind is that if you have a book club that's focused on, say, romance books, it might not really work to have someone there who is a reader of nonfiction military history.
Sure.
That seems to be, that would be something that I think that person just really isn't interested in these books. So why?
Yeah, I mean that person would miss the purpose. They would
Yeah.
miss the meaning. They would miss all of the sort of unspoken cues about that particular genre. That being said, though, too, I think that in the example of book clubs, and if you are talking about the uninvited versus the invited, like, do you uninvite somebody who hasn't read the book? Is their purpose in that meeting null and void because they cannot participate adequately? And so then it dulls the experience for everybody who has read the book, who really does want to dig in and converse about it, or, somehow interact from it. So then you have, again, the opposite perspective of, well, maybe they didn't have enough time to read the book, but they can still listen in. They can still perhaps interject their own opinions. I know that you are of the opinion that if you don't read the book, then listening to somebody else's opinion is not enough.
It is not. That is my opinion. Yes, it is not enough. I think you need to read the source text to then be able to engage meaningfully in the conversation.
Yeah.
But, thinking about that example, I think that there is, if someone, like I said, that aspect of her idea of gathering has been a little bit controversial. And I think there's something to be said about maybe if a person is interested in a particular subject, like in a book club, if they're interested in reading romance, but they don't have a background in it, but still trying to engage in it, they might add some other perspective. It depends on the personality.
I mean, if you read the book and you have an interest in it, you don't have a vested interest in blowing it up because you don't like romance, you like military, historical nonfiction.
As an example.
Yeah. But like, you would almost have a vested interest in, no pun intended, blowing up the
That's
romance
true.
meeting, where it's like, well, if you have an interest in reading it and honestly participating in it, then even if you're not, an aficionado, you still, I think, have purpose of being there.
Yeah. And that actually, so that brings up this other notion that I found really interesting that Priya Parker talks about, which is her expertise is conflict resolution.
Mm-hmm.
That's what she's trained in. And she's done a lot of work in that. And it's the idea of generating heat. She sort of recontextualizes conflict with just using the term heat, generating heat, and whether or not that can have a positive effect in a particular gathering. And so there's an aspect where that person who comes in, not necessarily wanting to blow up the meeting, but maybe bringing in a certain amount of skepticism or a certain slightly different background or experience, while still being interested in that subject matter or that particular topic or whatever it may be, being a generator of heat, of there being some conflict, and the idea that conflict can have a positive effect on a gathering as well. So, what do you think about that?
I think conflict is probably a very harsh word. I'm kind of thinking of like, you need a little bit of heat to get the juices flowing, the grease flowing. Like if you have a cold piece of bread and a cold lump of butter and you try to smash them together, it's just like it rips everything apart. But if you warm up the bread, you warm up the butter a little bit, not too much, because then you're going to melt the butter and burn the bread. Then it's also not going to be usable. But if you kind of like give a little bit of, bringing that heat, bringing that tension perhaps, then it goes well together, and you can combine those ingredients. You can combine the conversations, you can combine thoughts and ideas. And I think that like a little bit of heat, but conflict again has that negative connotation.
Right, which is
like
why she, I think, changes.
Which
is why I think she changes the term. And she uses the term heat, generating heat rather than just conflict. So which I think is really interesting. Another interesting thing, and we were actually talking about this a little bit yesterday, and you mentioned it just a little while ago, is the idea of liminal spaces and creating these like small worlds. And I can't help but think that has something to do with also there being a good host. And the host's ability to sort of, when you enter these gatherings, I guess you're entering a sort of micro world. And and I was curious what you thought about that in terms of what she says about it and your own experience.
I think within creating that liminal space, not events, but like places that you go, so theme parks or museums, or I guess using the planetarium perhaps as an example. You go through you show your ticket, and then you're ushered up into this smaller, darker room that has some TVs on the columns or on the walls or anything, and it gives you a little bit of a background of what space is and everything. And then as a group, like this is where you're gathering as that group. You're starting to becoming the gathering almost, and becoming a team, becoming a mini society. And then you're ushered into the planetarium, that space, as a cohesive whole. You've been primed almost with those TVs, with that dark space, and now you're entering into that world. If you think about that from like a dinner party or anything, and it's really interesting actually, when you were asking this question, I was already sort of thinking about the differences in cultures too, where there are certain cultures that as you come into somebody's home, you take off your shoes. And that's almost this liminal space where you sort of leave a little bit of yourself, and maybe a lot of yourself, at the door or outside, this idea of checking your ego kind of thing. And then you go in all on equal footing. It kind of sounds a little punny, but I'm not necessarily meaning it as a pun in that regards. But you leave your old self behind. You come in, you take off your shoes, you come in, and you're ready for this gathering. Then there are other cultures where you just stomp right on in with your shoes. You bring all of your external baggage with you, and then you kind of like just explode into this space, into this gathering. And I do think that we need those subtle, small acts of arrival, or those small, subtle acts of change. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily, again, changing your personality or anything, but just preparing yourself, priming yourself to be in that space with other people who are like-minded and want to be there as well.
When you were talking about that, it sort of reminded me a little bit of what I experienced in the Middle East, where it's actually so there's a really strong culture around the whole notion of hosting and guest friendship, which is also something that exists in ancient Greek culture, this idea of guest friendship. For instance, in books like the Odyssey, the Odyssey specifically, there's this whole notion that a stranger can come to someone's house, and before the guest, well, first of all, the guest, the person who's in the house, the homeowner, whatever you want to call it, the king, is obligated to accept this person into their home as a guest, and that person is then to treat the person coming in to visit as in this form of guest friendship. The word is xenia, actually, is the actual Greek term for it. They come inside the house. You're not compelled to ask them any questions about their life, and they're not compelled to have to divulge anything about their own lives until they have been fed and made to feel welcomed, after the whole process of sort of the initial feasting occurs. And then once the feasting is over, all the food is removed, and only then can you really start asking questions about this person. In the Middle East, what I have experienced is that there is this sort of sense when you enter someone's home, you take off your shoes and you enter their home, and you are their guests. And there are certain things that you do that's part of the process of being in this person's home. You're served coffee or tea. You sit on the floor. You eat with your hands most of the time. And as a guest, there are also certain rules. There's certain polite interactions that you have with the person that are they're pretty structured in some ways, and you sort of can ask, and you don't ask certain things. But the role of the person who's hosting is total. And Priya Parker talks about this, that when you come to someone's house, and also what you spoke about, which is this idea that you have to be a good host. You don't just say, hey, make yourself at home. You actually create a structured environment. And Priya Parker talks about this, where no one wants to be on a skipperless boat. And because then you're sort of cast adrift. And I think that holds true. Now, Priya Parker also specializes in helping organizations work through their conflicts or their heat, and also in terms of their gatherings. And I was wondering, how do you think this book has maybe helped you in the corporate setting, in the professional setting? So how has this book informed the way that you host meetings, for instance? And how do you think it can help others actually be better at meetings and gatherings, be better at conferences?
Yeah. I think that a lot of the underlying information, so what is not written in the book, is have a plan. The plan really does deliver the purpose. So in meetings, I think that everyone can agree, in work meetings, that if you don't have an agenda, it's an utter waste of time. Have an agenda, be respectful of other people's time, and ask them to prepare something. So give them a purpose for being there as well. Like let the agenda say, we're going to go over this, this, and this, and have Mike and Jane, prepare this, and have Carl and Leonore prepare that, and then have a little bit of space for dialogue, for maybe conflict, some differing opinions, and then have a section for, okay, what are our takeaways? What are our actions from this? Because if you also don't leave the meeting with any real tangible to-dos, it's also a waste of time. It's just a venting session. And so, yeah, in the corporate setting, again, be a good host, send an agenda, give people purpose, give people homework, give people prep to work or to do from. And I think that from my own personal expertise, I talk a lot to clients about their websites and about the purpose of their websites. And it really does come from this book, in that, okay, a website is not just something pretty. Oftentimes it's talked about being your business card and giving users or your prospective clients information. And it certainly is. But you also have to be a good host. You have them land on your homepage and tell them what to do. Guide them through the process you want them to go. If you have pages and pages and pages with kind of what's referred to as dead ends, then they don't know what to do, and they're just going to leave your website with absolutely no takeaways, nothing that they gained from the experience, and you're going to be forgettable. It's the same way with a party. Like, give somebody a reason to come back, give them a takeaway, give them an action item. So this book is, I read it when I was in a different profession, and now it's definitely
one that involves a lot of gathering as well.
It does. And now it's kind of crossing over into another profession, which I honestly, if I had a different profession, I'd probably still find a connection to this too. So it's kind of why this book is on my top 50, and definitely recommend it to, honestly, anyone that is interested in getting together, having a reason to get together, somebody who hosts meetings, somebody who hosts conferences, somebody who hosts events, somebody who hosts webinars, somebody who is, designing a website, or really, again, it's kind of anybody, everyone should read this, Art of Gathering.
Well, there you have it. She actually answered my last question even before I asked it. So yeah, there you have it. This week's choice, this week's selection, or I should say your choice for this week, The Art of Gathering. Basically a book for everyone. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
If you made it this far, make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you are notified of any upcoming episodes. It's free for you, but it means the world to us.